Let's talk about the story of Jacob and Esau, which you can find in Genesis 25. I'll explain it to you in a simple and straightforward way, as if we were having a conversation. Isaac, Abraham's son, married Rebekah when he was 40 years old. The story of Isaac and Rebekah is similar to that of Abraham and Sarah because they also faced difficulties in having children, but their situation was even more complicated. Rebekah couldn't get pregnant, which made their situation even harder. Now, despite Isaac being the promised and important son, he didn't have everything easy like his father did. He had to have a lot of faith and wait a long time for God to answer his prayers. He didn't give up, even when it seemed like he would never have children. Isaac prayed to God for help, and God heard his prayers. Then, Rebekah finally became pregnant. This part of the story shows how Isaac trusted in God and believed that he could solve even the biggest problems. Even when things were tough, Isaac kept the faith and continued to ask for help. God then made a miracle happen, and Rebekah became pregnant. Let's talk about Isaac's prayer being answered. The story shows that even though Isaac prayed for children, the answer didn't come right away. He married Rebekah when he was 40, but his children, Esau and Jacob, were born only when he was 60. So, Isaac waited 20 years to see his prayer answered. This long wait highlights how patient and trusting Isaac was. Even without a direct answer from God, he believed that his prayers were heard. The story doesn't tell us that God spoke directly to Isaac, so he wasn't sure if his prayers were being listened to. But Isaac's faith did not waver. He held on to hope and believed that God had a plan, even if the answer took a long time to arrive. Isaac showed great faithfulness, waiting 20 years without seeking shortcuts or alternative solutions. He didn't look for other women to have children outside of his marriage to Rebekah and never doubted God's plan. This shows Isaac's loyalty and steadfastness. Even without seeing immediate results, he continued to trust and wait for the right time that God had for him and Rebekah. During the pregnancy with twins, Rebekah experienced a turbulent time as the babies jostled within her womb. This caused her significant concern and discomfort, leading her to seek God's guidance. In Genesis 25 verse 22, Rebekah said, "Why is this happening to me?" So, she went to inquire of the Lord. Rebekah's inquiry demonstrated her deep faith and trust in God's wisdom and intervention during this challenging period. In response to Rebekah's question, the Lord provided insight and prophecy about the twins in her womb, revealing to Rebekah that 2 nations and 2 peoples would come from her descendants. Furthermore, God predicted that the older son would serve the younger, indicating a reversal of the traditional expectations of primogeniture. In Genesis 25 verse 23, the Lord said, "2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. 1 people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." This direct communication from God to Rebekah highlights the unique way divine guidance was given in Rebekah's case, where God chose to provide her with direct insight and reassurance about the turbulent pregnancy she was experiencing. This can be seen as a demonstration of God's compassion and understanding of the concerns and anxieties of expectant mothers. The divine revelation to Rebekah served to calm her worries and offer comfort during a challenging time. Additionally, God revealed to Rebekah not only the number and sex of the children she was carrying, but also the future dynamics of her children. The prophecy is clear and profound, providing specific details about the twins she carries, their future roles, and the dynamics of their relationship. God tells her that 2 nations are in her womb, and that 2 peoples from within her will be separated. This direct statement indicates that Rebekah will give birth to twins who will become the ancestors of distinct, perpetually conflicting nations. God continues by saying that one will be stronger than the other, implying dominance or superiority of one brother over the other. Finally, God concludes that the older will serve the younger, suggesting a reversal of traditional expectations where the older brother typically inherits leadership and authority. Traditionally, the younger siblings were expected to serve the older ones, but in stories like Isaac and Ishmael, things were different. Isaac, the younger, was chosen to inherit Abraham's blessings and was seen as special. Some might argue that this happened because Abraham and Sarah were his parents, as God intended, and not just because he was younger. Now, with Rebekah's twins, God said something surprising. The younger brother would be greater than the older. This goes against what people expected, but why did God decide this? You might wonder, especially since neither of the children had been born yet, and they hadn't done anything good or bad. God's ways are mysterious, and He sees things differently from us. Even before the twins were born, God knew what their futures held. His decision might seem strange, but it is part of His larger plan, which we might not fully understand. Some theories suggest that, knowing everything that would happen in the future, God already saw the good and bad actions of Esau and Jacob. Based on this foresight, He decided that Jacob was more deserving and preferable than his brother. This idea is suggested in Malachi 1 verses 2-3, where God says, "Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. I turned his hill country into a wasteland and left his inheritance to the desert jackals." Essentially, Esau's fate seemed determined from the beginning, and God had already decided who would serve whom. Some people interpret the mention of God hating Esau not as personal animosity towards him, but rather as God's rejection of the idea of Esau receiving Abraham's covenant instead of Jacob. As we see later, Esau is not described as dishonorable or malicious. In fact, he shows many traits that contrast with Jacob, making Jacob seem weak and lazy in comparison. It is worth noting that despite God's judgment, Isaac still favors Esau as his favorite son. Another theory, though speculative, suggests that God chose Jacob over Esau because Esau supposedly tried to harm Jacob while they were still in the womb. However, it is essential to recognize that this detail is not explicitly mentioned in the Bible. According to a Jewish legend, whenever Rebekah was near an idol of a false god, Esau would kick in her womb. Conversely, when she approached a place dedicated to the Lord, Jacob would kick. Some interpret these kicks as indications of the baby's recognition or excitement towards one deity over another. However, it is important to note that this tale is not explicitly stated in the Bible. Moreover, some consider it unfair and unreliable to interpret fetal movements as any indication of divine preference. In Genesis 25 verses 24-26, when the time came for Rebekah to give birth, there were twins in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. So they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel, so he was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. The biblical account describes Esau as being born first and being red and hairy, possibly indicating his unusual appearance at birth, including his reddish complexion and hairy body. Jacob's birth, on the other hand, is marked by his hand grasping Esau's heel. This gesture symbolizes their struggle in the womb and suggests the dynamic relationship between the twins, even before their birth. Jacob's action of holding onto Esau's heel might be seen as a metaphor for his desire to overcome his brother or assert his own significance. Even from the moment of birth, Esau's victory in being born first is clear from this exchange, but Jacob's resentment and frustration towards his brother are evident, even at this early stage. By grasping Esau's heel, perhaps trying to hinder his progress, this act foreshadows Jacob's future as a trickster. Holding onto his brother's heel, he could be compared to a heel catcher, a term suggesting deception or dishonesty. This episode hints at the complex dynamic and character traits that will unfold in Jacob's life. The Bible does not delve into the childhood of Esau and Jacob in this section, quickly moving on to their adulthood. Esau emerges as a skilled hunter and outdoorsman, while Jacob prefers staying at home and living among the tents. This contrast between the brothers highlights Esau's assertiveness and perhaps extroverted nature, juxtaposed with Jacob's calm demeanor, possibly indicating introversion. The narrative also suggests that neither Isaac nor Rebekah loved their children equally, with Isaac favoring Esau and Rebekah favoring Jacob. In Genesis 25 verses 29-31, there is a significant encounter between the two brothers. Once, when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came from the open country, famished, and said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." That is why he was also called Edom. Jacob replied, "First sell me your birthright." Esau, feeling famished, made an offer that Jacob could not refuse. Jacob knew that the birthright was a significant inheritance and a blessing given to the firstborn in ancient Jewish tradition. Since he came out of the womb holding onto his brother's heel, some might think he always had some sense of its value, even if subconsciously. The birthright was not just about rights. It meant receiving a double portion of the inheritance and becoming the family leader. With this, we see Jacob's ambitions becoming evident. He desired these privileges for himself and was willing to exploit his brother's hunger to obtain them. His actions reveal a calculated pursuit of his own interests, even at the expense of his brother's well-being. However, Esau points out the absurdity of Jacob's demand. In Genesis 25 verses 32 to 33, Esau said, "Look, I am about to die. What good is the birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So Esau swore an oath to Jacob, selling his birthright to him. This incident shows that Jacob really embodies the notion of a heel catcher. He shrewdly exploits his brother's desperate situation, making him an offer that Esau feels he cannot refuse. Many view Jacob as the villain in this interaction, and it's hard to argue otherwise. He takes advantage of his brother's vulnerability for his own gain. However, some argue that Esau is the true villain because God had already chosen Jacob to carry the birthright when they were in the womb. According to this perspective, Jacob is not deceiving Esau out of anything. He already possesses the birthright and is simply persuading Esau to acknowledge it. Additionally, it is suggested that Esau, by selling the birthright, even if it does not rightfully belong to him, is engaging in dishonesty by negotiating for something he does not own. Another viewpoint portrays Esau as the more dubious figure in this sibling rivalry. Esau does not recognize the spiritual significance of the birthright. He disregards the covenant and honor of being the first descendant of Isaac, choosing to trade his birthright for food. One might argue that Esau felt compelled to sell the birthright to avoid starvation. However, it can also be argued that, as a skilled hunter, Esau had the ability to hunt and sustain himself. In this case, he might have chosen not to make the effort. This suggests that Esau did not value Abraham's legacy or appreciate the significance of being a descendant of the great prophet. His willingness to easily part with the birthright reflects a lack of understanding or regard for his heritage. In Genesis 25 verse 34, Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank, then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. The deal was made, and Jacob obtained the birthright while Esau received bread and stew in exchange. As a result of this transaction, Esau came to despise his birthright because he never truly valued it from the beginning, or because he thought so little of it that he exchanged it without much consideration. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the birthright and whether Esau should have kept it or if Jacob was more deserving of it. Do you see Esau as the victim in this sibling rivalry, or do you think Jacob was justified in exploiting or taking advantage of his brother for personal gain? Share your opinions in the comments below. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe and give the video a thumbs up. Feel free to share your comments or critiques in the comments section below.